The crystal glasses clinked mockingly as Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the grand ballroom of the Harrison Roads Country Club in Newport, Rhode Island. Champagne dripped down her second-hand dress, a dress she'd spent 3 months' savings on, while Victoria Rhodes, the club's golden daughter, smiled with calculated malice. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Victoria drawled, her perfectly manicured hand covering an insincere smile. "I didn't see you there, just like nobody ever sees you, isn't that right, little seamstress?" The whispers and snickers echoed through the room like poison darts, each one striking Sarah's heart with painful precision. At 25, she'd worked her way up from nothing, building a small but promising boutique tailoring business in downtown Newport. But to the old money families that frequented the club, she was nothing more than the help, the girl who altered their designer dresses and fixed their husbands' suits. "You really shouldn't be here," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "This charity gala is for members and their actual guests, not the hired help who snuck in on Jeffrey's pity invitation." Sarah's eyes darted to Jeffrey Harrison, the man she'd foolishly believed was different from the rest of Newport's elite. He stood among his peers, his handsome face twisted with embarrassment, but he didn't step forward to defend her. Of course he wouldn't. His family's merger with the Rhodes Corporation was worth far more than any feelings he might have had for the local seamstress. Sarah's voice cracked, but she forced herself to stand straight, channeling the strength her late grandmother had always told her she possessed. "I have every right to be here. I was invited." Victoria's laugh cut through the air like a knife. "Oh, sweetheart. Did you actually think Jeffrey was serious about you? That he'd risk his family's reputation for someone who lives above her little shop on Thames Street? How quaint." The room spun as Sarah noticed the engagement ring glittering on Victoria's left hand, the same hand that had just accidentally spilled champagne on her dress. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The secret meetings Jeffrey had claimed were about business, his sudden distance over the past week, the whispers that had followed her all evening. She'd been nothing but a distraction, a temporary amusement while the real arrangements were being made between Newport's two most powerful families. But it was what happened next that would change Sarah's life forever. As she turned to leave, dignity in tatters but head held high, she overheard Victoria speaking to her father, Richard Rhodes. "Daddy, we need to do something about that shabby little shop of hers. It's an eyesore on Thames Street, and now that she's made such a scene. Well, we can't have her type thinking they can mix with us, can we?" Richard Rhodes's response was cold and calculated. "Don't worry, princess. I've already spoken to the building's owner. By this time next month, she'll be looking for a new location, preferably in a different city altogether." Something snapped inside Sarah at that moment. The tears that had threatened to fall dried up, replaced by a fire she didn't know she possessed. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "When they try to bury you, remember you're a seed." As she walked out of the Harrison Roads Country Club that night, Sarah Mitchell made a vow that would echo through the years to come. She would not only survive, she would thrive. She would build something so magnificent that even the mighty Rhodes family would be forced to acknowledge her success. What she didn't know then was that this humiliation would be the catalyst for an empire that would eventually bring Newport's elite to their knees. She didn't know that 5 years from this very night, Victoria Rhodes would be begging for her help. She didn't know that her grandmother's ancient sewing machine, currently gathering dust in her shop's backroom, would become the cornerstone of a fashion empire that would redefine American luxury. But first, she had to survive the storm that was coming. And Sarah Mitchell had always been good at weathering storms. As she walked home along Thames Street, her ruined dress clinging to her skin in the cool Newport breeze, she began to plan. She had 3 weeks before Richard Rhodes's threat would become reality. 3 weeks to figure out how to save everything she'd built. 3 weeks to transform from victim to victor. Little did the Rhodes family know, they hadn't just humiliated a seamstress, they had awakened a force of nature. And Newport would never be the same. In her small apartment above her shop, Sarah sat at her grandmother's sewing machine, running her fingers along its worn edges. Tears finally fell freely, but these weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of determination, of rage, of promise. Tomorrow, she would begin. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel every sting, every jab, every moment of humiliation. Because she knew that from this pain would rise something extraordinary, something that would make Victoria Rhodes's champagne stunt look like the petty act it was. Sarah Mitchell was about to show Newport what happened when you underestimated the girl from Thames Street. And it would be spectacular. Dawn broke over Newport Harbor as Sarah unlocked her shop's door, her grandmother's words still echoing in her mind, "Innovation comes from necessity, child." She'd spent the night poring over fashion magazines, industry reports, and her own designs, the ones she'd kept hidden away, deemed too bold for Newport's conservative tastes. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah's heart stopped. Standing there was Eleanor Blackwood, one of New York's most notorious fashion critics, known for her scathing reviews and impossible-to-please attitude. Sarah had read every one of her columns in Vogue. "I heard about last night," Eleanor said, removing her oversized sunglasses. "The Rhodes family has always been particularly skilled at cruelty." Sarah straightened her spine. "I'm afraid we're not open yet, Ms. Blackwood." "Oh, I'm not here for alterations." Eleanor's eyes swept the modest shop. "I'm here because I saw your work at the Winterbourne wedding last month. That bride's dress, you modified it, didn't you? Transformed that atrocious Vera Wang into something revolutionary." Sarah's breath caught. She'd spent weeks rebuilding that dress, incorporating elements of vintage design with modern aesthetics. The bride had wanted something unique, and Sarah had delivered, though she'd never taken credit for the transformation. "That was my work, yes." Sarah lifted her chin. "But how did you know?" Eleanor smiled, a rare sight that had been captured by paparazzi exactly twice in the last decade. "Because, my dear, I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I know brilliance when I see it. The Rhodes family may own Newport, but they don't own talent." She placed a business card on the counter. "I'm hosting a fashion showcase in Manhattan next month. New designers, fresh perspectives. I want you there." Sarah picked up the card, her hands trembling. I can't. Mr. Rhodes is making sure I lose this space in 3 weeks. I have no capital, no connections." "What you have," Eleanor interrupted, "is something far more valuable. You have nothing left to lose." She gestured around the shop. This is a cage. What happened last night wasn't your destruction, Sarah Mitchell. It was your liberation." As Eleanor's words sank in, Sarah's mind raced. She thought of the designs she'd been sketching in secret, the innovative techniques she'd developed out of necessity when working with limited materials. She thought of her grandmother's antique sewing machine, with its unique stitch patterns that modern machines couldn't replicate. "The showcase," Sarah said slowly, "how many pieces would I need?" 10. "And they need to tell a story." Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "Make it a story about transformation. About rising from the ashes. About being underestimated," Sarah finished. She walked to the back room and returned with a sketchbook she'd never shown anyone. "I think I have just the story." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah shared her vision with Eleanor. She explained her idea for a collection that would combine vintage techniques with modern sustainability, using reclaimed materials and her grandmother's unique stitching patterns to create something entirely new. "This isn't just fashion," Eleanor mused, flipping through the sketches. "This is revolution in fabric form." She looked up sharply. "But you'll need help. Resources. A team." As if on cue, the bell chimed again. Lucy Chen, Sarah's best friend and former fashion school classmate, burst in. "Sarah, I just heard about last night. Those absolute," she stopped short at the sight of Eleanor Blackwood. "Perfect timing," Eleanor said. "How would you like to be part of something extraordinary?" Lucy, who'd been working as a junior buyer for a department store in Boston, didn't hesitate. "I quit my job last night when I heard what happened. I'm all in." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes, but these were different from last night's. These were tears of possibility, of hope, of determination. She looked at her grandmother's sewing machine, then at the 2 women in her shop, one a legend in the industry, the other her most loyal friend. 3 weeks, she said firmly. "We have 3 weeks to create something that will make Newport remember the name Sarah Mitchell." "Oh, darling," Eleanor purred, "when we're done, Newport won't just remember your name. They'll whisper it in fear." As they began to plan, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jeffrey. "Can we talk? I can explain everything." She deleted the message without responding. There would be time for confrontations later. Right now, she had an empire to build. What Sarah didn't know was that across town, Victoria Rhodes was already regretting her actions. Because while she'd been sleeping off her champagne-fueled cruelty, her father had made a catastrophic business decision, one that would soon make the Rhodes family desperate for allies in the fashion industry. And Sarah Mitchell, the seamstress they tried to destroy, was about to become the most powerful ally they could have had. But first, she had a collection to create. And as she, Lucy, and Eleanor began to work, the hum of her grandmother's sewing machine filled the air like a battle cry. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of fabric, needles, and determination. Sarah's small shop had transformed into a makeshift atelier, with Lucy managing supplies and Eleanor making calls to her extensive network of industry contacts. The combination of Sarah's grandmother's vintage techniques and modern sustainable materials was creating something unprecedented in the fashion world. But on a rainy Tuesday morning, everything threatened to fall apart. "The Rhodes Corporation just bought out our supplier," Lucy announced, bursting through the door. "They've canceled all our orders. Every single one." Sarah's hands stilled on the vintage sewing machine. She was halfway through the collection centerpiece, a stunning evening gown made from reclaimed silk and antique lace. How did they know? "Someone talked," Eleanor said grimly, looking up from her laptop. "The fashion industry runs on whispers, darling. And the Rhodes family has ears everywhere." Before Sarah could respond, the bell chimed again. This time, it was Madison Hayes, Victoria Rhodes's younger sister, looking decidedly uncomfortable in the small shop. "Before you throw me out," Madison said quickly, raising her hands in surrender, "you need to know something." Victoria's engagement to Jeffrey? It's not just about love or social status. The Harrison family is buying out Rhodes Corporation. Sarah frowned. Why would the Rhodes family sell their company? Madison glanced nervously over her shoulder before continuing. "Because Daddy made a terrible investment. We're broke. The champagne at that gala? It was the last of our real wealth. Everything else is smoke and mirrors." The revelation hung in the air like heavy perfume. Sarah exchanged looks with Eleanor and Lucy. "Why are you telling us this?" Eleanor asked, her critic's instincts sensing a story behind the story. Madison's eyes welled with tears. "Because I'm tired of the lies. And because..." She pulled out her phone, showing them a series of photos. "I've been following your work, Sarah. These designs you're working on? They're incredible. They could save both our families, if you'd consider." "A partnership?" Sarah finished, her voice sharp. "After what your family did to me?" "No," Madison shook her head. "A takeover. The Rhodes name still means something in Newport, even if our accounts are empty. Combined with your talent." She trailed off, leaving the possibility hanging in the air. Sarah walked to the window, looking out at Thames Street. The same street where she'd walked home in humiliation 2 weeks ago. The same street where her grandmother had taught her to sew in the apartment upstairs. The same street where, in 3 days, she was supposed to pack up her dreams and disappear. "Eleanor," she said finally, "what would happen if we revealed the Rhodes family's financial situation at your showcase?" Eleanor's smile was predatory. The vultures would descend before Victoria could finish her morning mimosa. "And if we instead revealed a partnership? A rebranding of the Rhodes name under new creative leadership?" "The stock would soar," Madison breathed. "Daddy would have to accept. He wouldn't have a choice." Sarah turned back to face them, her grandmother's wise words echoing in her mind. "Sometimes, child, victory isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about transforming them into allies." "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Madison, you're going to help us get new suppliers, ones your family doesn't know about. Lucy, start working on a rebranding strategy. Eleanor, I'll make sure every important eye in the industry is on your collection," Eleanor finished. "But Sarah, are you sure about this? You could destroy them instead." Sarah looked at the half-finished gown on her grandmother's sewing machine. "Destruction is easy. Creation is an art. And I'm an artist. What none of them knew was that at that very moment, Victoria Rhodes was discovering her own set of devastating photographs, ones that showed Jeffrey Harrison in a very compromising position with his family company's biggest competitor. The web of lies and betrayal was about to unravel in ways none of them could predict. But for now, Sarah had a collection to finish. And as she returned to her sewing machine, she smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, it's worn on the runway, stitched with both skill and mercy. Madison left with a new purpose, Lucy dove into rebranding strategies, and Eleanor began making her calls. The small shop on Thames Street hummed with energy, possibility, and the sweet sound of justice being tailored to perfection. The morning of Eleanor's showcase dawned bright and clear in Manhattan. Sarah stood in the preparation area of the venue, surrounded by her completed collection, 10 pieces that told the story of her transformation from Newport's scorned seamstress to innovative designer. But backstage, chaos erupted. "She's here," Lucy hissed, rushing in with her phone displaying breaking news. Victoria Rhodes just arrived, with the entire board of Rhodes Corporation. Before Sarah could respond, Victoria herself swept into the preparation area, looking considerably less polished than usual. Her designer outfit couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the slight tremor in her hands. "We need to talk," Victoria announced, her voice lacking its usual arrogance. "Privately." Sarah glanced at her collection, then at Eleanor, who nodded subtly. "5 minutes," Sarah said, leading Victoria to a quiet corner. "I know what you're planning," Victoria began. "Madison told me everything. But there's something you don't know." She pulled out a USB drive. "Jeffrey, he's been selling company secrets to our competitors. These photos prove it. If they get out, both our family's companies will be destroyed." Sarah studied Victoria's face, seeing real fear there for the first time. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," Victoria's voice cracked, "you're the only one who can save us all. Your collection, your vision, it's exactly what both companies need. The board members are here to see it. They've heard rumors about your sustainable luxury concept. They want to make me an offer," Sarah finished, understanding dawning. "But you're here to make a different one, aren't you?" Victoria nodded, tears threatening to spill. "A partnership. A real one. Not just business, but I want to make amends. What I did to you at that gala, I've spent every day since then ashamed of myself." Before Sarah could respond, Jeffrey Harrison himself burst into the preparation area, his usual polish replaced by desperate panic. "Victoria. Sarah. You can't." "Actually, they can," came a new voice. Richard Rhodes stepped out from behind a rack of clothes, followed by Eleanor Blackwood. "And they will." Sarah looked between them all, Victoria with her USB drive of secrets, Jeffrey with his guilty conscience, Richard Rhodes with his empire crumbling around him. Then she looked at her collection, at the centerpiece gown that combined old and new, strength and grace, vengeance and mercy. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "Victoria, those photos stay private, but Jeffrey resigns from both companies, effective immediately." Jeffrey started to protest, but Richard Rhodes silenced him with a look. "Mr. Rhodes," Sarah continued, "you'll maintain your position as chairman, but with a new creative director and equal partner." She paused, looking at Victoria. "Two partners, actually." Victoria's eyes widened. "What?" "Your father's business sense, my design vision, and your marketing expertise. Together, we could revolutionize sustainable luxury fashion." Sarah held out her hand. "What do you say?" The moment hung in the air like suspended crystal, fragile and precious. Then Victoria took Sarah's hand, and Richard Rhodes smiled for the first time in weeks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor announced to the gathering crowd of industry elite, "I believe we're about to witness not just a fashion show, but the birth of a new empire." As Jeffrey slunk away, defeated, Sarah turned to her collection. The first model was already dressed in her opening piece, a suit made from reclaimed materials that somehow managed to look more luxurious than anything on Fifth Avenue. "Ready?" Lucy asked, clipboard in hand. Sarah touched the vintage lace on the centerpiece gown, thinking of her grandmother's words one more time, "The strongest bridges are built from broken pieces." "Ready," she said, and gave the signal for the show to begin. The lights dimmed, the music started, and Sarah Mitchell's revolution began to walk down the runway. But this time, it wasn't just her revolution, it was a transformation for everyone involved, a chance for redemption, renewal, and reinvention. And as Victoria Rhodes stood beside her, both of them watching their new future unfold on the catwalk, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from transforming them into your strongest allies. The fashion showcase had ended in triumph, but the real work was just beginning. 3 months after the show, the newly formed Mitchell Rhodes sustainable luxury brand was making waves across the industry. Sarah's small shop on Thames Street had transformed into their design headquarters, while the Rhodes Corporation's Manhattan office handled business operations. "The numbers are incredible," Victoria announced during their morning meeting, spreading charts across Sarah's grandmother's old work table. "Pre-orders for the fall collection have exceeded projections by 300%. Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to a more pressing concern. "What about the Thames Street development project?" Victoria's expression darkened. "My father's old board members are still fighting us on it. They don't see the value in turning this street into a sustainable fashion district." "Then make them see it," came Eleanor's voice from the doorway. The fashion critic, now their official brand ambassador, strode in with her usual dramatic flair. "Because you're about to have bigger problems." She tossed a tablet onto the table. The headline made both women freeze: Harrison Enterprises launches competing sustainable fashion line. "Jeffrey," Victoria whispered, her face paling. "He's using everything he learned from our companies." Sarah picked up the tablet, studying the article. "He's partnered with Marcus Chen." Lucy, who had just entered with their morning coffee, nearly dropped the tray. "Marcus Chen? The designer who was accused of using sweatshops?" "The very same," Eleanor confirmed. "They're marketing it as affordable sustainable fashion, but we all know what that means." Sarah stood, walking to the window that overlooked Thames Street. The same view she'd had for years, but now she saw something different: possibility. "Then we'll fight back with the truth." She turned to face her team. "Victoria, call your father. It's time to implement phase 2 of our plan. Lucy, contact every ethical supplier we've worked with. I want documented proof of their working conditions." "Eleanor." "Already on it, darling," Eleanor smiled, typing on her phone. "I'm calling in every favor I have in the industry. By the time I'm done, everyone will know exactly what kind of sustainability Harrison Chen is really offering." But as they mobilized for battle, a new complication arrived in the form of Madison Rhodes, bursting through the door in tears. "They're blackmailing me," she sobbed. "Jeffrey and Marcus, they have photos from last year's Hamptons party. They're threatening to release them unless I publicly support their new line." Victoria moved to comfort her sister, but Sarah held up her hand. "Wait. Madison, those photos, they're from the party where Marcus Chen first proposed his cost-cutting manufacturing methods, aren't they?" Madison's eyes widened. "Yes. I was there. I heard everything. I even recorded some of it on my phone because it seemed so wrong, but I was too afraid to do anything then." Sarah exchanged looks with Victoria and Eleanor. "Sometimes," she said softly, "what seems like our greatest shame can become our greatest weapon." Over the next few hours, they formulated a plan that would not only protect Madison but potentially transform the entire fashion industry. Sarah's vision for Thames Street would become a blueprint for ethical fashion districts across the country, while Madison's evidence would ensure that companies like Harrison Chen could never exploit workers under the guise of sustainability. "But we'll need help," Victoria pointed out. "The kind of help that only old money can provide." Sarah smiled, remembering the gala where this all began. "Then perhaps it's time for another party. One that will make that charity gala look like a casual dinner." Eleanor's eyes sparkled. "I know just the venue. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is looking for sponsors for their next fashion exhibition. Something about the future of sustainable luxury." As they planned their counterattack, Sarah received an unexpected text from Jeffrey: "We need to talk. Things aren't what they seem with Marcus." She showed the message to Victoria, who had become not just a business partner but a true friend. "What do you think?" Victoria studied the message, then looked at Sarah with determination. "I think it's time we found out what Jeffrey Harrison is really afraid of." What none of them knew was that Marcus Chen had secrets of his own, secrets that would shake the fashion world to its core and test the bonds of their newfound alliance in ways they never imagined. The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed under the evening lights as New York's elite gathered for what promised to be the most talked-about fashion event of the year. Sarah stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing her own creation, a stunning gown made from reclaimed vintage materials that seemed to capture and reflect every light in the room. "Ready?" Victoria asked, standing beside her in a complimentary piece from their collection. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance. Marcus Chen was arguing with security, Jeffrey Harrison nervously hovering behind him. "Let them in," Sarah instructed quietly. "It's time to end this." As Marcus and Jeffrey approached, Eleanor smoothly intercepted them, press corps in tow. "Mr. Chen. Such a surprise to see you here. Care to comment on the recent exposé about your manufacturing facilities in Southeast Asia?" Marcus's face contorted with rage. "Those reports are lies. And I know exactly who's behind them." He pointed at Sarah. "You think you can destroy me with your self-righteous sustainability? I built this industry while you were still fixing hemlines in Newport." The room fell silent. Sarah descended the stairs slowly, every eye following her movement. "No, Mr. Chen. You didn't build this industry, you exploited it. And now." She nodded to Madison, who stepped forward with her phone. "We have proof." Madison's recorded evidence began playing through the museum's sound system. Marcus's voice filled the air, detailing his plans to circumvent labor laws and environmental regulations. "That's not all," Jeffrey suddenly spoke up, his voice shaking. "Show them the rest, Sarah. Show them what he made me do." Victoria gasped. "You knew? All this time?" "I was in too deep," Jeffrey admitted. "The photos you found, Victoria, they weren't just about company secrets. They showed me visiting Chen's factories, documenting everything. I thought I could gather enough evidence to stop him." Sarah studied Jeffrey's face, seeing real remorse there. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because," Marcus snarled, pulling out his phone, "he knew what would happen to his precious family name if he did. One press of this button, and every major news outlet gets proof of Harrison Enterprises' involvement in my operations." "Press it," came a new voice. Richard Rhodes stepped forward, flanked by members of the Fashion Ethics Committee. "Go ahead, Marcus. Show them all. Because while you were busy threatening Jeffrey, you didn't notice what was happening to your own empire." On the massive screens around the museum, images began appearing, documents, contracts, bank transfers. The complete dismantling of Marcus Chen's fashion empire, orchestrated by the unlikely alliance of Sarah Mitchell and the Rhodes family. "Your factories have been shut down," Sarah announced quietly. "Your workers are being compensated and retrained. Your contracts are being transferred to ethical manufacturers. And your brand," she smiled softly, "is being transformed into a training institute for sustainable fashion practices." Marcus lunged forward, but security quickly restrained him. As he was led away, Jeffrey turned to Sarah and Victoria. "I know I can never undo what I did," he said quietly. "But I want to make it right. Everything I know about Chen's operations, his contacts, his methods, it's yours." Victoria touched his arm gently. "It's a start." As the drama unfolded, Eleanor was already orchestrating the media coverage, ensuring that the story would be told their way, not as a scandal, but as a transformation. A story about the fashion industry's evolution toward true sustainability and ethics. Later that evening, as the excitement died down, Sarah found herself alone in the museum's fashion wing. She stood before a display of vintage couture, thinking about how far she'd come from that humiliating night at the Newport Gala. "Your grandmother would be proud," Victoria said, joining her. "We all are." Sarah turned to her former enemy turned closest ally. "We're not done yet. Thames Street is just the beginning. There are thousands of small designers out there, just like I was, waiting for their chance." Victoria smiled. "Then let's give it to them. A sustainable fashion empire built on talent, not privilege. On innovation, not exploitation." As they stood there, planning their next moves, Sarah realized that her grandmother had been right all along. Success wasn't about destroying your enemies, it was about transforming the entire battlefield. And she was just getting started. 1 year after the Metropolitan Museum showdown, Thames Street had transformed into America's premier sustainable fashion district. Sarah's original shop now served as both a design studio and a mentorship center for emerging designers. But on this particular morning, an unexpected visitor disrupted the usual creative buzz. Ms. Mitchell, her assistant, called through the intercom. "There's a woman here, she says she's your mother." Sarah's hands stilled on the fabric she was working with. Patricia Mitchell had abandoned her and her grandmother 15 years ago, chasing dreams of Hollywood stardom. Now, as if summoned by success, she stood in the lobby of Mitchell Road's headquarters. "Send her up," Sarah said after a long pause. Patricia Mitchell hadn't aged well. The Hollywood dreams had clearly turned sour, leaving behind a woman who looked far older than her 45 years. "Sarah, darling," she smiled, arms outstretched. "You've done so well for yourself. Why are you here, Mom?" Sarah's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "Can't a mother be proud? I saw you in Vogue, in Forbes. I thought it was time to reconnect. After all, family is family." "Family?" Victoria entered the room, her timing impeccable as always. "Family doesn't abandon their child and leave them to be raised by their grandmother." Patricia's smile faltered. "You don't understand. I had dreams, opportunities." "Like the opportunity you see now?" Sarah asked quietly. "Looking for a piece of what I've built?" Before Patricia could respond, Eleanor burst into the office, tablet in hand. "Sarah, we have a situation. Chen's former partners in Asia, they're reopening the factories under a new name. They're calling it heritage craftsmanship to avoid the sustainability regulations." Sarah looked between her mother's opportunistic smile and the tablet displaying another threat to ethical fashion. The choice was clear. "Mom," she said firmly, "if you want to reconnect, you'll need to earn it. Just like I earned everything I have." She turned to Eleanor. "Book the jet. We're going to Asia." The next 24 hours became a whirlwind of activity. Victoria coordinated with their legal team while Madison, who had become their head of ethical compliance, prepared documentation of the new violations. Jeffrey Harrison, working to redeem himself, provided crucial intelligence about Chen's former networks. What they discovered was bigger than anyone anticipated. The heritage craftsmanship operation wasn't just about avoiding regulations, it was about destroying the sustainable fashion movement entirely. "They're planning to flood the market with counterfeits of our designs," Madison explained during their emergency meeting. "Made with toxic materials, sweatshop labor, everything we've fought against. But they'll label them as sustainable, destroying consumer trust in the entire industry." Sarah stood at the window of their private jet, watching the clouds pass below. "Then we'll show the world the true meaning of heritage." She turned to her team. "Victoria, call your father. It's time to activate the Heritage Protection Protocol." The Heritage Protection Protocol was their secret weapon, a blockchain-based authentication system they'd been developing in partnership with traditional artisans worldwide. Every genuine sustainable garment would carry a digital signature telling its complete story, from raw material to final stitch. But as they prepared for battle, Patricia Mitchell made another appearance, this time with information that would change everything. "I wasn't just in Hollywood all these years," she revealed. "I worked as a costume designer for several studios. I know things about the textile industry in Asia, things that could help you." Sarah studied her mother's face, seeing something genuine there for the first time. "Why should we trust you?" "Because," Patricia's voice cracked, "your grandmother made me promise, on her deathbed, that if I ever had the chance to make things right with you, I would take it. This is my chance." The revelation stunned Sarah. She'd never known about this deathbed conversation. Looking at her mother now, she saw not an opportunist, but a woman seeking redemption, just as Jeffrey had, just as Victoria had. "Very well," Sarah decided. "But you'll work with Madison's team, under strict supervision." As they approached Asian airspace, Sarah received an urgent message from Thames Street. The first counterfeits had hit the market, and social media was exploding with confusion and accusations. The war for the soul of sustainable fashion had begun. But this time, Sarah Mitchell wasn't fighting alone. She had an army of allies, former enemies turned partners, a mother seeking redemption, and an industry ready for real change. What no one knew was that among Chen's former partners lurked someone from the Rhodes family's past, someone who had been waiting years for revenge. And as Sarah's plane descended toward Hong Kong, this hidden enemy was already setting their own plan in motion. Hong Kong's neon lights reflected off the rain-slicked streets as Sarah and her team arrived at their hotel. But before they could even check in, Victoria received a disturbing call. "It's Sebastian Rhodes," she whispered, her face pale. "My father's younger brother. The one who disappeared after the investment scandal 10 years ago." Sarah remembered the stories. Sebastian Rhodes had nearly bankrupted the family once before, then vanished with millions in company funds. "He's behind the heritage craftsmanship operation?" "Worse," Victoria said. "He claims he has evidence that our sustainable practices aren't what they seem. He's threatening to release documents showing we've been cutting corners, using the same suppliers as Chen." "But that's impossible," Madison protested. "I personally verify every supplier." Patricia Mitchell stepped forward. "Unless someone's been forging the verification documents." All eyes turned to her. "During my Hollywood years," she explained, "I worked on a film about corporate espionage. The technical consultant taught me about document forgery. Sebastian's using the same techniques. I recognize the patterns in these papers." Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Eleanor. "Thames Street under attack. Protesters claiming Mitchell Rhodes is a fraud. Media everywhere. Need you back now." "We can't leave," Victoria argued. "Sebastian's here. We need to stop him." Sarah looked at her team, then made a decision. "We split up. Victoria, you and Madison stay here with my mother. Find Sebastian, get proof of what he's doing." "Jeffrey?" Jeffrey Harrison, who had been quietly monitoring his Asian contacts, nodded. "I'll help them. I know how Sebastian thinks. I worked with him before everything fell apart." "Eleanor and I will return to Newport," Sarah continued. "We need to protect what we've built." But as they prepared to separate, a new player emerged. Chen's former assistant, Li Wei, approached them in the hotel lobby. "I know where Sebastian's evidence is stored," she said quietly. "And I know it's all fake, because I helped him create it." The revelation sparked a dangerous plan. While Sarah and Eleanor flew back to handle the crisis in Newport, the others would orchestrate a daring operation in Hong Kong. They had 48 hours before Sebastian planned to release his fraudulent evidence. What they didn't expect was Patricia's crucial role in what followed. Her years in Hollywood hadn't just taught her about forgery, she'd learned about disguise, deception, and the art of the con. Skills that would prove invaluable in outmaneuvering Sebastian Rhodes. As Sarah's plane took off for Newport, she received one last message from her mother. "I'll make you proud this time, sweetheart." "I promise." Back in Thames Street, the situation was deteriorating. Protesters crowded the sidewalks, many wearing cheap counterfeits of Mitchell Rhodes' designs. Eleanor's media contacts revealed a coordinated campaign of disinformation, all leading back to shell companies in Hong Kong. "He's trying to destroy everything," Sarah realized. "Not just our company, but the entire concept of ethical fashion." But Sebastian had made one critical mistake. In his desire for revenge against the Rhodes family, he'd forgotten about Sarah's greatest strength, her connection to the community of small designers and artisans she'd helped build. As the protesters shouted outside, Sarah walked out to face them, wearing the first dress she'd ever made on her grandmother's sewing machine. The simple, elegant design embodied everything their movement stood for. "You want to know the truth about Mitchell Rhodes?" she called out. "Look around you. Look at Thames Street. Every shop, every studio, every designer here has a story. We're not just a company, we're a revolution." One by one, doors opened along Thames Street. Designers emerged, each carrying examples of their work, each ready to tell their story. The truth about sustainable fashion wasn't hidden in corporate documents, it was alive in the community they'd built. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, Victoria, Madison, Jeffrey, and Patricia were about to discover just how deep Sebastian's conspiracy went, and how far he would go to maintain his hold on the counterfeit empire he'd built from the ashes of his family's disgrace. What no one realized was that Sebastian Rhodes had one more card to play, one that would force Sarah to make the hardest choice of her life, testing the limits of redemption and the true meaning of family. Sebastian Rhodes stood in his penthouse office overlooking Hong Kong's Victoria Harbour, studying surveillance photos of his niece Victoria and her team. But his attention was drawn to one figure in particular, Patricia Mitchell. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, "there's been a breach in our security system." At that exact moment, Patricia Mitchell was proving that a mother's determination could rival any corporate security. Using her Hollywood-learned skills, she had infiltrated Sebastian's operation while Victoria and Madison created a distraction at his main factory. "The evidence isn't just fake," Patricia reported through her hidden communicator. "Sebastian's been working with someone in Newport. Someone close to Sarah." Back on Thames Street, Sarah was addressing a crowd of international media when she received her mother's message. The betrayal it revealed shook her to her core. Thomas Bennett, her shop's first employee and trusted production manager, had been Sebastian's inside man all along. "He's been doctoring our supply chain records for months," Eleanor confirmed, checking their database. "Making it look like we've been using the same suppliers as Chen." But Thomas had made a crucial mistake. In his eagerness to please Sebastian, he'd left a trail of authentic documents hidden in the one place he thought no one would look, Sarah's grandmother's old sewing room. "Your grandmother never trusted digital records," Patricia's voice crackled through the secure line. "She kept paper copies of everything." Thomas didn't know about her hidden compartment behind the vintage dress form. As Sarah raced to the sewing room, Victoria and her team in Hong Kong were closing in on Sebastian. But he was ready for them. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize your mother's Hollywood tricks?" Sebastian sneered at Victoria. "I've been playing this game since before you were born." "No," Victoria smiled, "but we thought you might be distracted enough to miss the real operation." At that moment, Jeffrey Harrison was leading a team of international labor rights investigators through Sebastian's actual production facilities. Every fake document, every forged certification, every illegal practice was being documented in real time. "It's over, Uncle Sebastian," Madison declared, holding up her phone showing the live feed of the raid. "Your empire is falling, and this time, there's no escape." Sebastian's face contorted with rage. "You think this is about money? About revenge? This is about power, the power to control not just fashion, but the very narrative of sustainability itself." "No," came Sarah's voice through the video feed. "This is about transformation." She held up a stack of documents from her grandmother's hidden compartment, the authentic records that proved not only Mitchell Rhodes' legitimacy but also revealed Sebastian's decades-long conspiracy against his own family. "You forgot one thing, Sebastian," Sarah continued. "True heritage isn't about power or control. It's about legacy, the kind my grandmother built with every stitch, the kind your brother is rebuilding with every ethical choice, the kind your nieces are protecting with every action they take." As security led Sebastian away, Patricia Mitchell stood beside her daughter through the video feed. "Sarah, I found something else in his office. Something about your grandmother." The revelation she was about to share would change everything, not just about Sarah's past, but about the very foundation of sustainable fashion in America. Because Rose Mitchell, Sarah's grandmother, hadn't just been a seamstress in Newport. She'd been part of a secret network of ethical fashion pioneers, working for decades to prepare for the very revolution her granddaughter would one day lead. And in the hidden compartment behind the dress form, Sarah found one last gift from her grandmother, a design that would become not just a piece of clothing, but a symbol of everything they'd fought for. 1 year later, Thames Street buzzed with anticipation. The Mitchell Rhodes Sustainable Fashion Institute was opening its doors, housed in a beautifully restored historic building that spanned an entire block. Sarah stood at the podium, wearing the final design her grandmother had left behind, a masterpiece that combined traditional techniques with revolutionary sustainable materials. The dress told the story of 3 generations, her grandmother's wisdom, her mother's redemption, and her own transformation. "Today," Sarah began, "we're not just opening an institute. We're continuing a legacy that began decades ago, when a group of visionary women, including my grandmother Rose Mitchell, dreamed of a fashion industry that could be both beautiful and ethical." Victoria and Madison Rhodes stood beside her, along with Patricia Mitchell and Eleanor Blackwood. Even Richard Rhodes had tears in his eyes as Sarah unveiled the institute's centerpiece, a museum dedicated to the secret network of ethical fashion pioneers. My grandmother wasn't just a Newport seamstress, Sarah revealed to the gathered crowd. She was part of a movement that spent years documenting fashion industry abuses and developing sustainable alternatives. Everything we've built here started with her vision. The institute would serve multiple purposes: a training center for sustainable design, a certification facility for ethical manufacturing, and an incubator for innovative fashion technologies. But its heart was the Rose Mitchell Memorial Workshop, where her vintage sewing machine held pride of place. Jeffrey Harrison, now heading the Institute's Legal Compliance Division, stepped forward with a surprising announcement. In honor of Rose Mitchell's legacy, the Harrison Foundation is establishing a scholarship fund for aspiring designers from underprivileged backgrounds. Victoria squeezed Sarah's hand as they watched former enemies become allies in their cause. Thomas Bennett, after serving time for his role in Sebastian's scheme, had provided valuable insights that strengthened their authentication systems. Even some of Chen's former workers had become trainers in ethical manufacturing practices. But our work isn't finished, Sarah continued. Today, we're announcing the Global Sustainable Fashion Initiative. 10 new institutes, on 5 continents, all built on the principles Rose Mitchell and her colleagues established. Patricia Mitchell, now the Institute's Director of Creative Innovation, unveiled the global expansion plans. Each location would combine local traditional techniques with modern sustainable practices, creating a worldwide network of ethical fashion innovation. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah found a quiet moment in her grandmother's restored workshop. The old sewing machine hummed softly, just as it had on that night when everything changed at the Harrison Roads Country Club. "You were right, Grandma," she whispered. "Sometimes the greatest revolutions start with a single stitch." Victoria joined her, along with Madison and Patricia. "The board just voted," Victoria announced. "The Rhodes Corporation is officially changing its name to Mitchell Rhodes Global." Father insisted. Sarah smiled, remembering the frightened seamstress she'd been, the woman she'd become, and all the lives they'd changed along the way. "What would you say," she asked, "to designing something new? Something that tells not just my story, or the Rhodes story, but everyone's story?" Together, they gathered around Rose Mitchell's sewing machine, beginning work on a collection that would celebrate not just their triumph, but the triumph of every person who'd ever been underestimated, mocked, or dismissed. Because in the end, Sarah Mitchell hadn't just built an empire, she'd built a movement. One that proved that true power doesn't come from destroying others, but from transforming the world, one stitch at a time. As the sun set over Thames Street, the lights of the new institute illuminated the path forward. In windows up and down the street, sewing machines hummed, a symphony of creation, redemption, and hope. Sarah Mitchell had shown the world that sometimes, the greatest revenge is success shared with others. And as she looked out over her transformed kingdom, she knew that somewhere, her grandmother was smiling.